It's my computer that's freezing, I think. And we're on. So, good afternoon, everybody. My name, as ever, is Aneesh de Vos, and we have the enigma that is David Buckler. I'm sticking with it, David. It came in last week, and that's where we're still going. I said we were going to keep it going for a few weeks.
Enigma.
You are still an enigma. I have got a lot of overexposure, and I've also unusually got internet connection problems. So if I freeze, I am not changing my shoes or nipping off and having a cup of tea, but David will take over. He assures me that his internet connection has been better than usual. Fingers crossed. But enough of us. We have with us today a really remarkable human being, because his name is Ben Goldsworthy, and his writing is something else. I wish in my wildest dreams that I could write in the same way that Ben does. And Ben considers himself, his words, an IT security researcher. So that means he does big things with computers. And really unusually, a volunteer ambulance crew member and owner of bengoldsworthy.net, which is nice to know, Ben, that you own yourself. Ben, how do you become an IT security researcher and then a volunteer ambulance crew member? How does that happen?
So I've been with a charity. I'll avoid saying the name, and obviously I'm speaking on my own behalf here, nothing to represent their views, but I think it was about 2 years ago. I joined them as a first aider, and I've sort of worked my way up. Qualified in March as an ambulance crewman, and then that turned out to be quite fortuitous timing, really.
Certainly it is.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember how I got into it in the first place. I think I had a friend who was running a course, and I thought, do you know what, I'll give it a go. And then I've cracked on with it for the sort of 2 years since.
Wow.
Yeah, it's been good fun. And
presumably you have training and things to go through.
Yeah, so lots of sort of courses. You have to do first aider first, and then advanced first aider, and then quite a sort of relatively lengthy course I started in January for being a emergency medical tech, but I think they've changed the name because that tends to mean something else outside of the organisation.
Right.
So I'm now an emergency ambulance crew.
So you go from learning this stuff, and then all of a sudden COVID-19 hits and you're out in the streets.
Yeah, pretty much. I think I finished the first course in, I think it was the first weekend of March. In fact, it was, because my birthday is the 8th, and I finished the course on the 7th or the 8th. So it was like a nice little birthday present. And then a couple of weeks passed, and then there was another upskill to get up to the sort of new standard. Yeah. And then 3 or 4 days later, April 1st, I was out on my first shift.
Wow. And
bit of a trial by fire.
That it really is, isn't it? And Ben, you have written, which people will be able to access, because as usual it will be underneath in the resources. You have written a blog. Do you call it a blog?
I don't really know what to call it. It's a website that I've basically shoved everything onto for the last 7 or so years.
Okay.
Sort of thoughts, reports, reviews, portfolios.
Yeah.
But I don't really have Facebook or anything like that, so I just use that as a big repository for everything. Mm-hmm. It is Ben Goldsworthy on the net, which
fabulous. We couldn't have called anything else, could you? But you've written this piece then about COVID and complicity, and if it's okay with you, I'm just going to read the last paragraph. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, go for it.
So you say, so no, I don't hate Boris Johnson because he's a Tory, or because he's a walking embodiment of unearned privilege, or because he's a perfectly ideology-free vacuum of naked ambition. I hate him because I read a load of Arundel and convinced myself I would be better than people like my great-grandfather, but wasn't when the time came. I hate him because I thought that Britain had its problems, but that its people were broadly well-meaning and good and would support one another. I hate him because I know that despite everything, he will probably win the next election. I hate him because of what he has made me realise about who I am, where I live, and who I live amongst. When I read that, and of course, guys, you're going to have to read the whole thing, but we're going to discuss it now. When I read that, I literally was in tears. I'm known for being a bit of a crier, aren't I, David? Mm-hmm. But I was literally in tears. And one of the things that keeps coming throughout this work is when you explain what you have been doing, there's this little snapshot on the quote on the end of a lot of the paragraphs. It had to be done. Ben, what was it that had to be done?
So there's a sense of all of the lockdown and everything like that, and all of the chaos. It's just an unavoidable tragedy.
Yeah.
This pandemic had happened. Eggs were going to get broken to make omelets and all the rest of it, which I think I agreed with at first, because it seems like, yeah, you can limit the bleeding, but ultimately it's a bad thing that no one's really at fault for. But as things have come out, sort of talk about the numbers of deaths could have been halved if they'd brought measures in a week earlier, I started to think, oh, do you know what? That's sort of arguing the difference between tens of thousands and slightly more tens of thousands, but ultimately it was still going to be bad. But then more things come out, and countries that dealt with it like adults, dealt with it early, or at least two examples of them, have managed to have no deaths, which it's not necessarily the case that would have been possible in the UK, but every difference between us and them seems to suggest that we should have an advantage. And even if it was the case that some people were inevitably going to die, it's the difference between not tens of thousands and other tens of thousands. It's the difference between a handful and, I think we're on around about 50,000 now. I think that it's buying into absolving the government of its responsibilities to say that, oh, do you know what, let's debate over which ones are inevitable and which ones weren't, because it's entirely possible that none of them were inevitable. I think that endpoint is, there's a tendency to ascribe political motives to criticisms, especially when they're your team. And so I wanted to make very clear that I'm not one of those people who wears never kiss a Tory stickers or anything. I keep my political views pretty, I don't really ascribe them, or describe them rather. I just sort of say what I think on individual issues and let other people figure out what I might be. I've been called a horrible floating voter before, which I think I quite like as a label. So I wanted to make very clear that it's not anything like that. I think that Boris Johnson, and I use Boris Johnson as sort of a symbol of the broader UK government, has basically caused a shitload of death and tragedy, and looks like he's going to get away with it, which rubs me up the wrong way.
And this is an incredibly powerful piece. David, over to you, because I don't want to hog it, and I know I'm coming in and out a little bit, so I'm hoping that you can stay in. Over to you. What did you think of that? I mean, I'm literally bowled over by it.
Well, yeah, it's a great piece of work, and it says a lot from, if you like, from someone who's on ground zero, you know, and I think you've every right to be angry. I'm angry too, very angry. And what you just said about they're going to get away with this, I just think you're absolutely right, and I feel quite helpless, quite impotent. But the other thing that spurs me on is people like you thinking that way, and similar to the way I do. But what comes to light more recently, I think, is, and I think we all have I have a sticking point on any given week about how this went wrong and why it went wrong. The sticking point for me at this moment in time is the amount of money being made off the back of, let's say, larger concerns or companies, conglomerates that are going to make a killing off the back of this by solely being recommended or put in place by a government decision. That happens to be a Tory government, and they're not unknown for doing this sort of thing. But that really gets to me, and I can feel it welling up inside me now, that the anger and the unfairness of it all, and that is my gripe. That is my big one at the moment.
I think that one of the things that I would also like to observe is that, Ben, clearly David and I are a bit older. A little bit.
I wouldn't say anything if you didn't.
No, just a tad. It was very kind of you not to. This is going to be your world. How do you make it? How do you improve on what has just happened? I mean, was it 100 Days yesterday, isn't it? It's like that book, 100 Years of Solitude, isn't it? By, God, I've got it on my bookshelf, can't think.
Is it Garcia Marquez?
Yeah, it's Garcia Marquez. You know, when that book keeps flashing through my mind through this, I'm just like, literally, this is what's happening. But where do you go forward? I mean, this is one hell of a powerful piece, and not to detract and move away from this, and of you really going through it piece by piece about what you perceive, you know, has happened. And I have to say, I agree with you. I have to say that I do agree with you. And yes, the views are my own. So where does the next generation go on the back of this? What does it look like from your landscape?
So I think I'm 24. I've sort of stopped keeping track since I turned 21 because it stopped mattering. But yeah.
Oh, how lovely to be so blasé.
Well, I think when I get to 40, then I can no longer get a Fields Medal or a Turner Prize. So that's the next big deadline. Probably not going to get either. So
it's nice you got it in view.
Yeah, got to have dreams. I don't know. I think it's probably a couple of years earlier than my time, but I know people who sort of, they were finished with British politics and Britain to a sense when the alternative vote referendum failed.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say failed. I should say decided that they shouldn't implement a non-stupid voting system that would mean that we get a continued guarantee of this sort of two-party constant stream of corruption and bullshit. And I know that an alternative system wouldn't be perfect, but it's hard to imagine a worse system than the current one for actually representing people. And it's also very easy to imagine better systems. Yeah. You can imagine anything and say, oh, this will be great, this will work, but do they work in practice? Which is when they tend to fall down and things go horribly wrong. But I think that, so one of my main big interests really for the last probably a couple of years now, I've written up something on it on bengals.radio.net, funny enough.
All right, well, we'll have a look at that then.
Is about the situation in northeast Syria. So the Kurdish regions that have de facto kind of declared independence, but they also haven't declared independence because they're kind of aligned with the Syrian regime at the moment. And so they basically brushed ISIS out, and then they've declared that in the ruins of the Syrian regime, they were going to just not institute their own state. They were going to go for a radical bottom-up system. Mm-hmm. I think it's called the Federated something or other. I've forgotten the name of it, but the name in Kurdish is Rojava. So I've been sort of tracking that and getting very into that for the last few years, and that seems to me to be the solution. That seems to be the better way.
Can you expand on that? Can you expand how a system that is over in Syria, how you perceive that a system over there, that it could be adapted and used over here?
Yeah, so I'll probably butcher it. There's plenty of books you can read on the subject, but the long and short is that they basically have a system of communes, which start off at the level of, I think, about 5-10 households. And they all meet up every now and then and discuss matters that relate to them, and then send one person up to the next level, which will be a neighbourhood, say, and all the way up to a city, and then a region, or a canton, as they're called. So it's kind of a confederated system like Switzerland in some respects.
Okay, yeah.
But they also apply that to basically every single function of the state, or lack thereof. So the military has communes, and the same sort of bottom up to the top measure of sort of power starts at the bottom and works its way up. And they have various other interesting things, like in the middle of an extremely sort of traditionalist region, they've somehow managed to start a feminist revolution, and they have their sort of separate armed forces structures for women only, the YPJ and such like that. They've got mandatory co-chairs for every major political organisation, sort of a man and a woman. And basically, obviously I'm not there, so it may be that I'm just reading biased accounts, but it sounds like it's basically doing what just seems to be a far better way of approaching it. People can deal with local issues. If they need to go higher, it can go up. Whereas I keep contrasting that with the UK, and we have Whitehall, which, yeah, you can send an MP, but I've never met mine. She doesn't know anything about me. I don't really know much about her. She is from Lancaster, which might be helpful, but if you're in Lancaster and Fleetwood, if you're not the area she's from, what does she matter what your potholes are doing? Although that's an unfair comparison, because that's the council's job. But we basically have the remnants of this structure. We have the city councils, the county councils, but they don't have much power, and they're dictated to by the central government. And we do have devolution of the regions, Scotland and stuff like that. But it's not small scale enough. Devolving Scotland is fair enough, but within Scotland you'll have people who could better deal with their problems at a local level than by sending them up to Holyrood. Or Holyrood, I don't speak Scottish.
So, David, that's a fascinating idea, isn't it? To kind of basically flip it, to stop this feeding down and bring it up. What do you think?
Yeah, and it's an interesting comparison with local government. I mean, there was, years ago, there was a consensus of opinion that local government wasted money. But I think they did a far better job than central government are now. At least they're closer to what's going on. And I think, yeah, that would solve the ultimate problem of the powers that be being displaced and living in ivory towers and not really having a grasp of what I think and what you think and what everybody else.
Yeah, I think to go back to...
Go on.
To go back to that quote from the end of the article, I hate Boris Johnson, but I shouldn't even really know who he is. He should be some minor functionary that the people of, is it Uxbridge he represents? The people of Uxbridge can chat to, and he knows them, but he's certainly not the one that I would have chosen out of my little neighbourhood commune. Like, this is the responsible guy I should send up. He will represent my issues. And I don't know his specifics, but there's so many MPs who just aren't in their constituencies, and they can't be in their whole constituencies. So they don't have any skin in the game. They're playing national politics with massive parties that combine people of wildly different views, circumstances, and goals. And it's just seems like a broken but clearly broken system that makes a lot of people very rich and very powerful, but not in proportion with their ability or sort of morality.
And there's that morality. Do you, big old word, do you think then that that this time of COVID, it's not, you know, I'm not saying it's a good thing, but do you think that those startling differences and disparities that have arisen from this, does that mean that we can learn from it and change it? Do you know what I mean? Is there enough weight in the community to say, hang on a cherry picking minute, this doesn't work and this is not okay? Are we able to hold them accountable?
I don't think we can in the current structure, the way it's set up. I think that I did say at one point in the article, ethics is hard.
You did say ethics was hard.
That is very much the case, but I think the way it's set up, it may be that he's held accountable in the sense that somehow people get so pissed off with him that in 4 or 5 years, whenever he has to call an election, they decide to vote against him. But I think one of the other things that I've taken away from this experience is that seeing people's reactions to all of this, I've lost that sort of faith in my countrymen. Sounds very, very high level, but yeah, I'm not really sure that we have the same values almost.
Yeah.
Because people seem to be applauding Johnson for opening up pubs and that, and I understand why people whose livelihoods are in those pubs need them open so they can make money. I understand why people who are bored and frustrated want to go out for a pint, but the thought that that is the pressing thing, or that Boris should be in any way praised for it, seems to belie a startling, strange ordering of priorities, considering we've just, you know...
We're still in 3 figures per day of deaths. Was it 170 odd yesterday?
Yeah. I can't speak to the epidemiological numbers. I think it's just the sense that, oh, cool, we can open up, we can start to move on. But I don't think we should move on. I think we need to consider how it got to this point, because it wasn't just that we were slow to act in January or February. It was 10 years, 15 years of the system working the way that it's always worked. And now you've applied this stress and we realise so many things. Yeah. I didn't make any mention in the article about where the majority of those deaths are falling upon. And it's obviously, on the one hand, it's the elderly, it's the sick, it's also like Black and minority ethnic communities.
Yeah.
Basically, the most vulnerable people have been shown to be the ones thrown under the bus for the sake of the middle class going for a pint after work.
Yeah.
Which isn't right, and it's a sign of sickness.
That, I don't know about you, David, that kind of makes me, I get choked up with these things, because that's a fact, isn't it? And, you know, the higher level of BAME communities, the deaths in there, the fact that the government have, you know, not let reports come out, etc., etc. I mean, the list is endless, but it's all right, because on July the 4th, we can all go and have a pint.
Yeah, and it occurred to me the other day, I don't know if this was intentional, but I guarantee you it was at some level. July the 4th, trying to make it our 4th of July is sickening to me.
Yes. Yeah, it is. David, I know that you get really pissy, like I do, about this. Let's talk about the austerity before COVID, because that is, as Ben has said and as we've said before, you know, this didn't just all of a sudden arrive on our doorstep. Yes, it did in terms of being a virus, but our lack of response, our lack of responsibility through a government to communities that were already damaged.
Yeah, and you know, there are things, there are systems, there are people, there are organisations that suffered in austerity. There were plans in place that were scrapped. And the NHS has taken a beating, and it's remarkable to see how much they've done in the face of that. We could have been better prepared. We could have been, goes without saying. Could have done with some better decisions further along the line.
Yeah. I don't know anything about the socioeconomic status of Vietnam or Mongolia. I think Vietnam's communist is about all I know from that. I imagine reasonably poor. I don't know what sort of level of inequality they have. I don't know whether Mongolia has been in austerity, but it definitely seems like whether or not we had an imbecile at the top when this thing happened, and we can see that an imbecile can worsen something, because that's kind of the story of America at the moment.
Very much so.
But an imbecile can't ruin something on their own. There needs to be a big pile of kindling for them to throw their idiot match at. And I think the fact of that kindling is something that me, as someone from a sort of fairly cushy middle class background, I could be aware of in an abstract sense.
Yeah.
And I could say, oh, you know, that sucks, we should change that. But it's never been made so sort of starkly clear. So there's the line about how a lot of this stuff, a lot of these conclusions I've drawn aren't new to a lot of people, and they'll be reading it and thinking like, oh wow, you only realise now. Like,
yeah.
Well,
but it's something that is being realised, because it's actually there in black and white now, isn't it? You know, it is, the writing is literally on the wall, and I genuinely sit there, and you know, I'm a huge believer in compassion. I'm always banging on about compassion and etc. and self-compassion, but how, I have no idea, I have no answer into how can we move forward from this. Where do we move forward to?
So I think that obviously everyone's got different proposals, different views. A lot of them will just say something that sounds nice, like, oh, we should have equality. And there's the big debate over equality of outcome or opportunity. But I think the sort of human readable goal is that your society should not be equal, because everyone makes their own decisions. And if you made equality of outcome for everyone, then that would be really, really difficult, to the point of impossibility, and require an awful lot of force and coercion. So I think you want your end goal to be, whether it's attainable or not, you should aim for it, that anyone in the society should be willing to switch places with whoever's at the bottom of it, whoever is the most vulnerable, whoever's the most exposed. If you said to someone, you probably have to incentivize them, because it's sort of worse than their current position. But if you said, right, you're going to be at the bottom for the next year, and then you can go back to where you were, and maybe you get like a new car or 10 grand or something. In Britain, no one would take that deal. That would be the stupidest deal you could ever take. And in America, even worse. In America, you'd not have healthcare, and you just die within weeks or something if you're not used to it. But I think there's an interesting part. So you're talking about solutions, and one of them that I was suggested was the example of Rojava. But I also think it's quite interesting. There's a group in the UK called the Sortition Foundation, who advocate for, instead of voting, considering as an alternative the idea of drawing lots, which does have a history in politics. We use it for jury service. With the idea that, I forget who said it, but there's that famous quote of like, anyone who goes for a position of power or responsibility or politics is the exact last person you'd want to be in that position. Whereas if it becomes a duty of everyone, it's like, oh, at any point you might be the person who makes decisions for your community on a higher level, but at the end of that you'll be going back to that community, so try not to be too much of a dick about it. That seems to me to be such an obvious mechanism for ensuring a higher quality of decision making,
because you were back in that community and being held accountable. You'll be back in whatever mess you make, you then live in it. So you can't just, so in economics it's called externalities, which is sort of the costs of something that you put onto someone else and you don't have to think about. So the obvious examples on a global stage would be like pollution in India to produce clothing that's really cheap for us. We think it's cheap, it's actually really costly, but we don't see that.
Whereas if you say, right, you're in charge now, but every corrupt deal you make, you have to live with next year when there's no money for fixing the potholes outside your house.
Yeah. I can see where you're going, and I can see why you say it's not going to happen, but I don't dislike it as an idea. I think it's actually got a lot of merit. David, you're looking pensive. Are you frozen?
Listening intently. What Ben described that as its merits, absolutely. Yeah. And I believe we do have to look at value away from finance. It makes a great deal of sense to me. This is what is so wrong, is that, for example, I read this morning that since 1991, our water suppliers paid 57 billion to shareholders.
No!
57 billion to shareholders. And we're losing millions through leaky pipes, etc., etc. And that's what I'm talking about. I mean, you would think water would be free, wouldn't you? I know. I mean, that's pie in the sky, but it probably is the cheapest household bill that we face.
Yes.
And it's an essential to life, isn't it? If you look at Maslow, it's on the bottom rung, isn't it? Really,
bottom rung.
So this is how it's all disproportional. Someone's making money out of giving us the fundamentals of life, and not just a few bob. Values need to change. Yeah.
So is COVID-19 a perfect storm for change?
I like to think so.
Yeah, I might have thought so before it happened, and then I've seen that everyone's just sort of not filled me with hope.
I guess the scenes of people on the south coast, I literally just looked at them with amazement, just literally with amazement. I was like, I mean, it's my job to kind of work with people and get some understanding, but I literally thought, wow, what part of you're not standing up for anything, you're just having a day at the beach. What part of you thought, I know, I'm going to nip on down to the south coast, I'm going to fill the beaches like I've never seen a beach filled for a very, very long time, in the midst of a pandemic? I don't know.
I truly believe that they thought they were going to be the only people there.
So does that then mean that
just
the individual
thousands of times?
Yes. But does that then mean that the individual has taken over from community? You know, Margaret Thatcher's "There is no society." Does that actually mean that it's bloody happened? That they don't think that anybody else is going to be there? I had to go into town the other day, and my daughter was with me, and I said, "Do you know, there's a lot of people around." And then I kind of checked in with myself and said, and I'm here too. So does it mean then that in actual fact, that capitalism that she brought in with a vengeance, her and Reagan, and they did, and they dismantled our water companies, and now those people get, what was it, 57 billion? I mean, numbers I can't imagine. So literally, does this, I mean, are we going back, not just the 10 years of austerity, are we going back to what Margaret Thatcher did? Is this what we are now reaping because of what she did?
Yeah,
I'm being political, I know, but jeez.
The thing about austerity is it's only austere for some people.
Of course.
And it's usually the majority. Yeah.
This is, so in terms of, like, obviously it was well before my time, and I've never looked too far into it. But in terms of the sort of Thatcherite economics and things like that, I personally feel that I support measures to restrict less and less. I think people should be, you get better results if people can freely make their own decisions and stuff like that. But obviously, rather than being like a full-on anarcho-capitalist, I think there are times where you need to have some restrictions. So something like water is a good one. There is an argument which, if someone wants to make it, I want them to make it honestly, that they think that actually there are costs involved in getting water from wherever it comes from, the the sky, I guess.
Yeah.
Getting water to people.
Yeah.
Those costs have to be covered. It's either by government, which distributes the cost over every taxpayer, or it's by individuals paying their, however much you pay for your water. And then the idea is that if you have a completely unregulated market, anyone could spring up a company who would be able to undercut the current ones if they came up with a better process, and take everyone's money if it was that system. And I'm willing to listen to arguments for that. But what infuriates me with a lot of the contemporary sort of political debate is that if Tories were honest about their stance, if they wanted to argue in favour of open markets, I'd be fine with that. But it's people like Boris Johnson, and Theresa May was the same, who obfuscate their motives. They say, "Oh no, I love the NHS." Like, he doesn't love the NHS, and I don't mind him not loving the NHS. If he wants to make the case for replacing it with something, I want him to make it obvious openly, and to present his arguments. And who knows, I may even be convinced. But it's the fact that, and I don't think this is entirely on them. I think this is partly because a lot of these issues are so fraught politically. They know that they will never win election if they're honest about what they believe. And because they've got this idea of, I want to win an election, not here are my views, and if my countrymen agree with them, they'll elect me. That becomes their priority. Whereas if you make these sort of positions not a goal to be achieved, not like a nice reward, but more a case of, I need to do this for a year, I've been picked out of the hat. It's more of an obligation than a position of power to be strived for. Then I think you'll, with a very simple change, although a radical one, you end up with a system where people begin, it's not going to happen overnight, but they begin thinking more locally. They begin thinking more, okay, I'm in charge now. What do the people that are part of my community, what are they all saying to me? Not what are these donors saying to me? But these lot in the tower block, like, they're not going to really help me. They probably don't even vote. I'll just sack them off. And then they don't vote, and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
I don't think there's anything wrong with making money. I genuinely don't. But like you say, let's make that money honestly. I'm not anti-capitalist. I can see that it has its benefits, type thing. I go to work and I charge something, etc. So clearly I'm part of a process. But you know what? When a water company, and like you say, I'm going to bang on a little bit about a big water company that goes into indigenous lands in North America, next to a reserve of First Nation indigenous people, and diverts their bloody water so that they are left with dirty water and not enough water, and can only go and get water at certain times of day, while that bottles it and charges a lot of money. That is when capitalism is beyond anything. That's when it becomes immoral. And like you say, and they get the water from the sky. Can you own the sky?
I don't know, but again, I was reading about a guy
arsy.
in America that's had no water since 2013 because he couldn't cover his departed mother's water bill, and he'd moved into a house. So it's not just the indigenous people who are suffering. But yeah, I think we're sort of straying off piste, I suppose, but it's all relevant.
It is relevant, isn't it? Because
we're still thinking of capitalism gone crazy. Yeah.
It is a system that has gone crazy, and this pandemic has highlighted that craziness, because it can't be hidden, can it? There isn't enough PPE. There isn't enough, people to come out and do the jobs, etc. when their whole department is ill. Do you know what I mean? There just isn't enough, and this is highlighted. What have we done? We've told people, right, get out of our country, off you go. Oh no, you can stay a little bit longer. Oh, you come out of your training, to the nurses, you come out of your training, and then we're going to give you some money. Oh no, we're not. It's like some horrid capitalist pantomime.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I think part of that is the lack of strong leadership. Boris Johnson, to go back to the main point we started on,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
he's very much, he gives the impression of being a competent, capable human being. But there's the quote that I quoted in the article, which is from I think it's called Charlie Strauss, where he's a perfectly naked vacuum of ideology and pure ambition, I think is the most accurate summary I've seen of him. It almost feels like he's not a person. He's like an idea, which is in no small part because I've never met him. So he is, to me, just an idea. But he's also wildly influential in the lives of me and 68 million other people.
Yes.
Yeah.
And wildly influential in the deaths of tens of thousands of people.
Yeah. Though he didn't cause them, his actions led to it.
Exactly.
And I don't think he should continue to be in the position he's in, but the mechanisms we have for that, for getting rid of him, the mechanisms that are part of the system are wait potentially 4 or 5 years when it won't be fresh in people's memories, and then they can be won over by various dodgy tricks. So I think at some point you have to go up a level outside of the system and think, okay, what are the other ways we can affect change?
Yeah.
So if I was going to coin a name for my political sort of manifesto, it'd be like political separatism, where if you can start, like, there's loads of systems around, if you can start making your own bottom up local connections, and then just for the most part ignore the government, let them do their thing. So there's a really good documentary called Tomorrow, I think it's 2017, it's a French one, about solutions to climate change, or possible solutions to climate change. And one of the things it says about is, much like if you have a monoculture of a crop, and that makes it vulnerable, the same is true of currencies. And there's not actually any rule that you can't make your own currencies. You can't make your own versions of existing currency, so you can't print off £10 notes, but you can make your own currency, and if everyone accepts that it has value, it has value. And so it goes to the examples of the Bristol pound that's sort of spread to a lot of other places, where they just said, do you know what, we're having all this money get siphoned out of the community to big multinational corporations. What if we have a separate currency going on that all the local shops will agree to use, and that means the money can't go outside the community? And that is the kind of hilarious genius in retrospect, like political economic direct action. It's not sort of throwing a brick through a window because you're angry that you can't recall someone if they're being corrupt. You have to wait for an election. It's, do you know what, we're just gonna go do our own thing, you carry on, don't mind us. Which is almost exactly what happened in Syria, because the regime couldn't control the area. They fled after ISIS, and the Kurds were left there and were like, oh, do you know what, I guess we'll have to do it ourselves.
There's a lot to be said with that. And looking at, I literally, David and I always say this, but we literally could sit and talk to you all night.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot to be said, and maybe we can close on that, you know what, almost, let them get on with what it is and do it yourselves at that community level. Because I think one thing that we have found through COVID is, in actual fact, community. And we are community connections, but community is the thing that's kept things going. You get in shopping for so-and-so, you know, all the little WhatsApp groups that you know, pinged up. That in actual fact, if we do go back to that very lovely, and I'm not going to say it's utopia, Ben, I quite like the sound of it, that you actually get on with it and sort it out on that community level.
Yeah. Don't wait for London to do it. Don't even tell your kids London exists. Let it be like the seat of a distant empire that they don't need to know about.
Yeah, we'll forget about London then, but not the people living in London. They're all right.
Although, just to clarify, if anyone's watching this, don't not pay taxes. That's not what I'm recommending at all.
No, we still pay a tax and everything. But
please don't come after me, HMRC.
to you for Prime Minister, Ben.
Well, I don't want it.
Oh, there we go. Ben is not
I'll
staking
George
his
Washington
claim.
it. I'll refuse it. They can give me some other minor position that will expire after a set time that I don't really want in the first place, and it'll be fine.
So I guess, Ben, this is how you get to be an IT security researcher, cross-volunteer ambulance crew, and then this secret life of the Ben Goldsworthy.net guy who comes out with these amazing and well-researched, you know, you're not talking at the back of your head, I can tell, you know, well-researched. I've literally enjoyed this chat. And
Me too.
David, have you got anything to add?
No, I just want to say thanks. And you're right. I mean, I think we were just getting warmed up and we go in other places, but I've really enjoyed this.
I think we are.
It's like the article, it's left with me more to think about. I do like things that make me think.
Well, we need to think now, don't we? We need to think outside of this box that we have all found ourselves in, because it doesn't work.
No.
Let's get started on the Lancaster pound.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna wait for my number to come up as well.
So we're all going to get our own regional pounds and get it working. I don't.
Yeah, regional pounds, city pounds. Have a pound with your family.
Well, we've literally traversed it today, haven't we? We have gone from, you know, COVID to the economy to the politics. As you would say, David, these things gather a life of their own.
Yes, they do. They do, indeed.
So
broad interests lead to interesting conclusions.
They do.
Connections.
And I like your interesting conclusion. So Ben, thank you so much.
No worries.
Definitely we'll keep an eye on bengoldsworthy.net for sure.
Yeah, but I have to write a blog to get into that now, and I'm going to work on that. You know.
Yeah.
Well, this is part of why I do the site, is that
I think it's a
Facebook
great idea.
Facebook and everything have normalised this idea that you don't have to own your own content, and it's tricky to do. But HTML is really quite easy. You can use tools like WordPress. Everyone should have their own site. If you want to syndicate content from it to your Facebook feed or whatever, then do that. But don't start on Facebook and just use that. Own your own name, buy you.net, and then put whatever you want on it. That's my closing argument.
We'll take that as a closing argument. And we will say thank you very much. So we are 100 days in lockdown, and we are somehow coming out on July the 4th. And I absolutely agree with you, Ben, about a little bit of cynicism there.
Maybe don't follow the government guidance. Maybe stay out of the pub for a bit.
Yeah, maybe. Just living on that edge. Maybe buy yourself a pint and sit in your own garden and chat to your neighbour over the garden fence or something. You know, those old-fashioned values. Ben, thank you. Thank you to everybody. And we will see you next week. When I say stay safe today, I really mean stay safe.
I echo that, and thanks again, Ben.
Yeah.
No worries.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.